The last style we'll talk about before we break for lunch is really the most widespread, and that is the German tradition. It is the oldest documented. We're not sure which is the oldest, but some of the first manuals we have access to are German. The first with images, the first with the idea of techniques that you can practice rather than hit them with the sharp end, which was very effective in the Viking era. So they had these manuals that started to give structure to how one fought, and they revolved around what was the sword of dominance at that time, which was the longsword. I don't have one of those myself.
Well, mine's right here on my bed.
Okay.
The red hilt.
So they revolved around basically this weapon, because this was, for the crude phrase, this was a man's weapon. This is what you took out into combat. This is what was going to be thrown at you. So this is what you had to know how to use. Not necessarily that it was a heavy weapon, but the way it was utilized could do tremendous percussive damage. I mean, it could cleave through someone, or if they had enough plate, it could basically like rattle their brains around inside their head and their helmet and cause damage that way. This is a very aggressive, coarse style of combat. But over time, as the centuries went by, because again, it's a very old style, they refined more precisely, like how do I generate the most power with the least effort? How do I end this fight yesterday so I can move on to the next person that's trying to kill me? The later stylists did incorporate more civilian elements. For the most part, this was as military as it got. You also saw this involved in the period judicial duels, back when that was still an option. You think I did something wrong, I'll fight you for it. If I win, then I didn't do it. And that's a really generalized explanation of it. So the Germans used the idea of the ward system. As opposed to one particular guard which you hung out at, like your safe harbor, so to speak, they had transitional positions they would move through in the fight. They knew what was an option, what was not an option at any given point. There were a couple more common ones and a couple ones that were starting to get very abstract, depending on which particular master you're looking at. But the whole fight revolved around going from one of these postures to the next. Those transitions from one to the next were often the attacks. So, for example, you had what was known as kind of the roof guard, so to speak. My German is not so good. But the idea is that I built up a lot of potential energy with all the gravity that I have. Another common guard was this, the fool's guard? The fool's guard. Now, what do you think could happen between here and here? A really powerful downward stroke, right? Or if you vary just a little bit, and you're from here and you step to the side, now all of a sudden you can have diagonal shots to get around defenses. That transition, which was just how you moved, move from one strike to the next, those were all combat movements. They could be used to defeat your opponent, and at the same time, as you recover from it, you're already in another position to defend yourself. Does it make sense? The other thing that came through with the Germans is that, while yes, this could be an offensive motion, this also works really great as a defensive one. Because even if their body's not here, their weapon might. If they're coming at you, and you make this sort of a motion, you can deflect their weapon rather aggressively, and that puts you in a better position to then continue on your strike towards them. Does it make sense? Now, this idea, even though the weapons changed, the clothing changed, the reasons for fighting changed, carried through the centuries. Sometimes they had rapiers just like that. Sometimes they had really devilish-looking weapons, just all sorts of hellish things you can imagine. The Germans loved. They were all about it. But the same concepts governed it. How do I go from a potentially disadvantageous situation to a more advantageous one, and how can I kill them in that process? Does it make sense? I have a couple more of the manuals on him up there as well, on one of the first published, Lichtenauer, who was one of the first ones that we really widespread study. So you can get an idea of some of the mechanics that go into it.